Welcome to the Michigan UFO Sightings and Paranormal Encounters podcast, where we explore the unexplained and mysterious phenomena that have occurred throughout the state of Michigan and beyond.
From UFO sightings to ghostly encounters, we delve deep into the stories, the evidence, and the theories behind these strange events.
We are your hosts. I'm Michelle.
And I'm Wayne.
We are an educator duo that after an encounter with a triangular UFO in 2018 in Michigan, we decided to investigate UFOs and the paranormal. In this podcast, we will be speaking with eyewitnesses, experts, and researchers to uncover the truth about some of the most intriguing cases of paranormal activity in and around Michigan.
Our goal is not to convince anyone of the existence of these phenomena, but rather to provide a platform for discussion and exploration. So, buckle up and join us on this journey down the paranormal rabbit hole.
On an escalator.
All right. Hello, everybody, and welcome. It is Sunday, January 26, 2025, and we are coming to you from deep within our bunker, yet again, in the shadow of the great Motor City, Detroit, Michigan. We want to thank you for joining us for this very, very special episode and the start of our 5th year of doing this podcast. So, Michelle, why don't you take it away with some quick housekeeping as always?
Hey, don't forget, if you have a story that you would like to share with us, please send it to mi.ufo.podcast@gmail.com.
Absolutely. And also, if you wish to make a donation to the podcast, you can do so with PayPal, Super Chats, buy us a coffee, check out our merchandise store, join the Patreon. All of those links can be found below in the show description right down there. If you become a YouTube member or a Patreon member, you will get a shout out during the intro and be listed in the credits at the end of the show as a thank you for your support. Also, don't forget, don't even bother hitting that like button.
Smash that thing.
Smash it. Detroit style. Smash that like button. Smash that subscribe button. And share us out. We need YouTube to realize the paradigm is changing and the time of censoring alternative theories is over. They can't do it anymore. And that's one of the topics we're going to talk about tonight with our special guest.
So, and even as a little precursor and sneak peek into next week, February 2nd, 2025, we're going to have on Arlen Schumer, the author of the 5 themes of the Twilight Zone. So Arlen, one of the country's preeminent authorities on comics and Twilight Zone, takes a deep dive into the themes of the TZ and examines the effects that the Twilight Zone had on popular culture, including UFOs, aliens, and the paranormal.
Absolutely.
So,
all right, Michelle, let's who do we got in chat?
Oh boy, we've got quite a few. I know that we have Straw Dog here. We have Diane Boss with us tonight. We have let's see, Nathan from the Quantum Show. We've got Tabin Rice is with us tonight. Guy Merritt. We've got Gary is with us tonight. Rick Davis. Let's see, Alex, Jay Hall, Dorothy Hawkins,
Blue Crossroads. Blue Crossroads. Smack that like button like a fairy tale stepchild.
There you go, Blue. Although I do not support smacking children, guys.
Don't smack children, but you know.
Trust me, we get the point.
Yeah.
All right. So, and of course, we know that we've got some very quiet observers right now, and that is okay.
We always have people that show up a little bit late, and that is fine too. So greetings, everybody. And this is our season 5 opener. And most of you know that I've been trying for a while to get Randall Carlson on the show.
2 years, guys.
At least 2 years, when I got to meet him at the Cosmic Summit 2023, which was the first one. And as you guys know, we had Johanna James on, got to meet her and hang out with her. Very cool. But now we have him. We got him, guys. So let's go ahead and get this party started and bring on the guest for the next 2 hours. You've seen him on Joe Rogan. He's been on Uncharted X with our friend, Ben Van Kerkwick. He has a podcast, Cosmographia, and the new podcast called Squaring the Circle. He's been on the Danny Jones podcast, Timothy Alberino, Tucker Carlson, and the headlining speaker for the Cosmic Summit the last 3 years. He's also made an appearance on the Netflix docuseries Ancient Apocalypse with Graham Hancock. And the list goes on and on and on. Oh, and how can I forget? The TBS created a documentary based on a lot of his research called Fire from the Sky in 1997. And you can find that on YouTube and watch it as well. He's a builder, a geometrician, a mason, an educator, and all-around amazing guy. It's been a long time in the making, but we finally have him with us tonight, albeit with a snort of derision. So we got to have that in there. So here we go. It's the one, the only, Randall Carlson. Randall!
Hey, guys. Hello, Wayne. Yeah, I finally succumbed to the unrelenting pressure of what, 2 years, 3 years? Oh, no, it's that Wayne guy calling again. Tell my wife, hey, if he calls again, tell him I'm not home. Tell him I've stepped out. I'm up in the wilderness of British Columbia, and I'll be back in a month. No.
Well,
none
Randall,
of that happened.
Well, here's the thing.
I have all the
proof. I have all the proof that we take a horrible selfie.
Look at that.
Yeah,
but who's the clean cut guy on the right?
Yeah, look at that beard. It's no longer the beard of knowledge. It was the beard of Cosmic Summit.
Yeah, was that last summer?
This was 2023. This was the first one.
Oh, that was the first one. Okay.
Yeah, but I think you had said to me, "Do you want me to hold your phone and take the picture? My arms are longer." So
I said that.
Yeah, it was funny.
Did I take that picture?
No, that was me.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Being absolutely ridiculous. So
yeah, well, look at the expression on my face. Like,
I know
God,
you're side eyeing me.
Who is this ridiculous guy I'm standing here with?
And why did he give me a shirt? So, all right. So I've got a bunch of questions, as it says in my tagline. I have questions, and Michelle wrote, Randall has the answers. So,
well,
I'm going to hold you to that.
The pressure is now really on, isn't it?
It is. So you and I had conversations on the phone a couple of times, and we discussed many different things. And one of the first things I wanted to ask you is, about your Rogan interview experience, and then how it seems like you were thrust into the mainstream popularity, especially with those of us who think there is these huge chunks of history missing, and something just doesn't seem right or feel right with the timelines and the evidence that's out there. So what has that journey been like for you? And do you ever get a chance to rest, man?
I seize every opportunity I can. So it's not unusual. Like, for example, during the middle of a live podcast that I might just nod off for 5 or 10 minutes. So you'll understand, right? And all the listeners will understand if I'm over here. No, I manage. Sometimes I think, God, I got to quit resting so much. I've got too much work to do. In fact, I kind of feel guilty if I rest too much. But, yeah, it was once a time when I was, young and vigorous, I could get by on 4 or 5 hours a night after night. Not anymore. I got to have my 7, 8 hours. Then I'm good to go. Then I'm recharged. But, yeah, life on Earth here is, it can be challenging, can it?
Yep. Absolutely.
I think, though, that we perhaps could be on the threshold of some major breakthroughs, some major insights, some major quantum leaps in our understanding. And I, for one, would like to do whatever I can do to help facilitate that process. So that's why I'm here with you guys.
Yeah.
And I think that's why we met at Cosmic Summit.
Yep. And one of the things, too, that I want to talk to you about here is the the discovery in Lake Michigan. And actually, there's a couple of these things that I want to talk to you about. But I think first we need to kind of start the framing of the picture of what you are. Well, you're known for many different things, but really bringing the whole Younger Dryas impact theory to the forefront. And for those people who are watching who are more on the UFO side and don't look at the ancient civilizations and ancient technology types of issues, can you talk about what that Younger Dryas actually is, the time frame, some of the evidence,
Sure.
and what pulled you into that?
Okay. Well, all right. Well, first of all, what pulled me into it was just an abiding interest in how nature works, the natural world. I got interested in science as a kid, small kid actually, 7, 8 years old. Lived in an environment in Minnesota, rural environment, northwest of Minneapolis. And where we lived was right on the margin of what was called now the superior lobe of the Laurentide ice sheet. You've heard of Lake Superior, the Great Lake. Obviously, you guys up there in Michigan know all about the Great Lakes, right?
Absolutely.
And there's an interesting, I mean, we could get into a really interesting discussion about the Great Lakes and the origin of the Great Lakes. And I actually think there's a connection back to the Younger Dryas. But anyways, where I grew up was right on the margin of the superior lobe, which came down its main trunk valley was Lake Superior. And it came down and it pushed its way south and it modulated north and south, back and forth for thousands of years, roughly at least 10,000, maybe closer to 15,000 years. So the landscape that I grew up in was a mix of glacial till, lakes, all kinds of lakes, eskers. If you know what an esker is, I can explain it later. It was a glacially sculpted landscape. So the glaciers, the presence of the glaciers, and the melting of the way of the glaciers, we had property on a lake, one of many thousands of lakes in Minnesota that are essentially the meltwater puddles left over from the melting of the great ice sheets. That's why Minnesota has something like 15,000 lakes.
Yeah.
I mean, they extend over into Wisconsin, they extend into Michigan, but for some reason, Minnesota ended up being sort of the central repository of these meltwater puddles. So we lived on one of those. Now, and I remember, 6, 7 years old, go down to the lake shore and then up a way, a little ways in amongst the trees, not probably over 20 feet from the edge of the lake, was this big old boulder. And it had to have been 7 or 8 feet in diameter. And I remember I'd climb up on that boulder and I would have a stick and I'd be fighting off monsters and everything like that. But somewhere in my mind, it was like, why is this big rock sitting here? And nobody could answer that question. You know, there was this big 7-foot boulder sitting right there in the trees next to the lake. And why is this boulder here, right? Well, and then we used to go places as a kid. One of the places we used to go was called, it wasn't an interstate park then, but it was a state park right along the St. Croix Wild and Scenic River, which forms the borderline between, part of the borderline between Minnesota and Wisconsin. And that was a route. The St. Croix River flows in a channel that was carved by these tremendous meltwater floods at the end of the last ice age that just preceded the Younger Dryas. So I'm going to come back to that, right? So there was a whole succession, dozens literally, of gigantic meltwater flows coming off the melting ice sheet, right? One of those came off right there where Duluth, Minnesota is, right there at the southern tip of Lake Superior, was a meltwater discharge point. Some of that water came down and it carved what is now the St. Croix River. Immediately to the northeast of Minneapolis, Twin Cities, where the river comes down, there is a place called St. Croix Falls. And there are basalt outcrops there. There are ridges of hard basalt rock outcropping on both sides of the river right in there. And it's a hard basalt. It's a kind of a narrow constriction. So when these meltwater floods came through, that kind of almost acted as a Venturi flume. It concentrated those flows, those intense flows, because you had the hard bedrock, see, the bedrock outcrop, so which was not easily erodable because of the nature, the density and composition of the rock. But
And
what did
didn't
happen?
and I'm sorry to interrupt, but didn't there have to be other flood pulses that happened to get down to that bedrock in the first place?
Well, what would happen is the initial flows are going to quickly remove any sedimentary overburden or cover over the bedrock and quickly get to bedrock.
Yeah, okay.
And that's why you do have this exposed bedrock there. I'm going to guess that prior to these meltwater floods coming through, it would have been a very gentle profile with a river flowing in it, and the bedrock was probably buried under a sedimentary layer. But when these great rushing torrential floods come through, they tend to sweep everything out, expose the bedrock. But what's interesting about this is that on the surface of this bedrock, particularly on the Minnesota, on the west side, because it's kind of at the outside of a meander, so the water was speeding up in that outside part of the curve. And as it was doing that, it was becoming very turbulent and creating these turbulent vortices called colks. They're like underwater tornadoes. So on the shelf of this exposed outcrop of basalt, it drilled a series of a couple of dozen holes into the bedrock that range all the way from being a few feet in diameter all the way up to 20, 25 feet in diameter and up to 80 feet deep. Now, that's no normal river flow that drills a hole in hard bedrock 60, 70 or more feet deep. In fact, I don't really know if we know for sure what the full depth of the big one is, because it's probably at least a third of the way filled with sediment. So if you really want to know the true depth, you'd have to dig the sediment out down to bedrock. Now, that may have been done. It wasn't done back in the day, but that was one of our regular outings. Maybe once every year or two, we would make this outing over to St. Croix Falls. And me and my brothers, growing up, we would play there. And I remember the first time going with my grandparents. And, my grandmother would tell me that, it was eroded by water. And I was trying to, how does water do that? Of course, it was only later that I begun to look at the world through the lens of catastrophism and realized, hey, there's a whole lot of things on this planet that we can't really explain if we confine ourselves to the uniformitarian or gradualistic models, right? But so there was a succession of these things, Wayne, that I think led ultimately into an interest in, it raised questions in my mind. Then, I've told a story, so I'm not going to belabor the details, but in 1969, just out of high school, I'm 18 years old, next to the Minnesota River Valley, which comes actually was one of the outlets of Glacial Lake Agassiz, which is a hell of an interesting story in itself. But that river comes down through Minnesota, bears to the east, and it connects with the Mississippi right there near the Twin Cities, right? But when Glacial Lake Agassiz drained, again, it was this gigantic catastrophic flow that came down off the southern outlet of this massive glacial lake that was literally like an inland sea of fresh water. I mean, if you were going to sail across the thing, it would take you days and days. You'd be out in the middle of it. You wouldn't have been able to see the shorelines, east or west, because it was so vast. So the southern outlet where this water discharged, there's a lake there. It's called Big Stone Lake. And that's always a giveaway. This is the people who become hunters of these kinds of lost histories. One of the things you should look at place names, because sometimes the place names will convey information or have hints. Sometimes maybe they have the ultimate roots in indigenous traditions. And of course, the indigenous peoples had all kinds of very informative, well-detailed, intelligent understanding and memories of these kinds of events that we're talking about. So anyways, back to this summer of 1969. every weekend for that summer, and I remember it was a beautiful summer. It was, around the same time that, the Apollo program, the landing on the moon program, all of that. And I'll just say as an aside, I have made pretty detailed investigations into all of the issues about the moon program, and I'm satisfied myself that it was real for many reasons, that it really did happen. And it wasn't faked, but that's a whole nother discussion. Let's not go there. I'm just going to throw that out now. Okay. So every weekend, they would have these rock concerts. They'd set up a stage just outside of an airport, kind of Flying Cloud Airport. Flying Cloud. It was up in the flat bluffs, right? So immediately to the south of the airport was the Minnesota River Valley. And there was a set of bluffs, a couple of 100 yards away, and they were 200, 250 feet high. And then you look down onto the valley floor, right? So it was I remember a beautiful summer day. There was a break in the music, and I just wandered. I like to wander around, look at things. And so I wandered away from where the site was, away from the crowd, and I walked over to the edge of the bluffs, and I was looking, and immediately down below me was the modern Minnesota River, right? And it was in its own little channel. Now, Minnesota River is not that little. I mean, it's a medium-sized river, and it was in channel with a bank on the south side, a bank on the north side. Now, I'm standing on the north side, and I'm looking to the south. 2.5 miles to 3 miles south on the other side, there was another set of banks that matched the ones I was standing on. And I remember getting this impression that I would look down at the Minnesota River, and I would see that it was in this channel. And then by immediately looking up, I got this impression that I kind of walked away from it. God, it was almost like this was this 2.5, 3 mile thing was a gigantic version of the channel of the Minnesota River. The Minnesota River is only as old as the end of the Younger Dryas. It's right at the end of the Ice Age, see? So what it's been doing is it's been cutting a channel in the floor of this valley. And that channel, probably only 11,000 to 12,000 years old. Okay, so I had this impression that kind of went in the back of my mind. I mean, and it marinated for, actually literally for half a decade or so before I really got to the point where I began really going, okay, I really want to learn more about all of this. Now, having read and had a very much fascination, as you may have too, Wayne, with mythology growing up, I read deeply into Greek mythology and Norse mythology in particular by the time I was in middle school.
Right? Michelle actually teaches mythology for middle schoolers.
Well, there we go. Okay, so here it is.
And I've got my mythology book right here.
Cosmic synchronicity. Here we go again.
Yep. Well, speaking of that, do you think you were getting a download?
I would say maybe I was. If I wanted to kind of look at it in conspiratorial terms, it sure seems like I was.
Well, you were being kind of tapped on the shoulder by a muse, it sounds like. I mean,
well, I remember very distinctly being 7 years old. Again, we live in the country, in the rural, and maybe, 300-400 yards away, there was up on the hill, there was a little cottage, and it was a rental cottage. For about a year or two, there was this kid living there that was the same age as me, and I would always go up and visit him. And on the field, this beautiful field, we're looking down, there's the lake down below, my house, some farmhouses and barns in the distance, right? There was a weeping willow tree. And one day, I'm leaving, I remember a beautiful summer day, and I walk down and I go under the willow tree, and I remember standing there, and the sun rays were breaking through the leaves and the branches, and it made this really kind of this interesting, almost hypnotic optical effect. And I went into some kind of a state, and I don't know how to describe it. On several occasions, I've tried to describe what it was. I can't really describe it, but in a way, it was kind of like I saw fate. I experienced destiny. I experienced the sense that there was a meaning to all of this, that there was a meaning to this life, to my existence. I don't remember. I wasn't there. I mean, I probably stood there 20 minutes under it, just because by that time, I'm 7 years old. So my mother's probably looking out the door to watch for me walking home, right? But yeah, I'll never forget that experience. And it was kind of like, from that moment on, I had this sense about my own existence that I'm here for a reason. There's a reason to my existence. And that kind of became one of my defining perspectives on life at that point, at 7 years old. And I carried that with me. Of course, it got, it would replenish itself from time to time. Adolescence, my orientation drastically changed, because rather than the deeper things in life that I had been interested in, even up to that point, to confess, I discovered girls. So
like the one right there, the yummy Michelle.
I have no doubt that in her day, Michelle was probably quite the catch, right? I think that way about my wife.
I'm not gonna comment.
I met this guy when I was 19. So.
Oh, when you were 19.
Yes.
Okay.
So we've been around a while.
Just wow, a fresh young thing. We were all so young once upon a time.
Yep.
I always say age is just a number, though.
I agree.
It's only a number.
I agree 100%, Michelle, because you gotta. A big part of it's up here. I mean,
yeah.
I know people through life that just didn't seem to have that, whatever it was, that, by the time they're in their 60s, they're already like ready to give up on it, and come on, I don't know. I don't know, because I've always been optimistic. I've always liked to learn. I love to learn, and I like to have fun while I'm learning. I love meeting people, but I also love solitude. So, you know,
that's exactly how I am. I'm an extroverted introvert.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. Yes. You love going out, meeting new people, meeting new friends and hanging out. And then at the end of the weekend or whatever, you're ready to like retreat back into your sanctuary where you can focus. And
yeah. It's like, Michelle and I are both teachers and stuff. And all day I'm in front of 120 students, teaching and talking and doing all this. When I met her when she was 19, I was playing in a band, touring all over the States and playing heavy metal music. And really? I met her, but I'll tell you, once I was done playing, I had to just go sit in the van, or I just needed to be on my own. I just had my
totally
own
get
thing.
it. Yeah, I totally get it.
And it's the same thing now. I can teach all day and have fun with the kids and teach and stand up there and be on stage or whatever I need to do, or do something like this. But then it's like, when this isn't happening, I'm like, I'm just my own
because
zone.
we answer a million questions a day, so our brains are fried.
Yeah, well, there is that, but being an introvert is the way that you reclaim that energy.
Yeah.
Some people have to go out and, like Michelle, I could drop you. You could have a horrible day at work. I could throw her in the car and drop her off at the casino, and she's recharging her energy while she's running around in the throngs of people, and I'm going, get away from me.
Yeah. I understand. I mean, like here now, I like with you guys, after we do our podcast together, I'm going to probably have to retreat into solitude for a couple of weeks. In the aftermath of interviewing with you guys.
Yeah.
No, I think you didn't quite get the joke there, but
because we're going to stress you out so much.
Yeah. I'm going to have, after doing your podcast, I'm going to have 2 weeks of solitude.
Well, just to jump back to what you were saying about like this feeling that you had, one of the questions I had that I typed up was, what role do you believe cosmic events have played in shaping not just Earth, but what you were just talking about, the trajectory of human consciousness. And then I put a little side note on that, possible, perhaps the forming of religions to become the vehicle for the stories of these catastrophes and stuff. So it's just, we're on the same wavelength when you're talking about being 7 and going through that state. And it just seems like that people are tapped on the shoulder for doing this. And I don't know.
From that moment, I mean, and then 2 years later, when I was 9, I kind of had it wasn't quite as potent, but it was nonetheless this sense, again, of like, destiny going, hey, and this is not an ego thing. I'm not trying to, blow up my ego like I'm
right.
It was just the sense that, and I hope that everyone gets that sense in their life that there are these points where you get the sense that your life has meaning and purpose. And I think those experiences are critically important to your psychological and emotional well-being, your spiritual well-being. So I found myself, going back to that, standing on that bluff that day. I still remember that to this day, and that impression that I carried away from there, and how it goes back maybe sat in my subconscious for 4 or 5 years, marinating, and then it just reactivated interest. And because later, in the early 80s, I was giving a lecture, and it was on sacred geometry. And I had been studying sacred architecture, and this was really one of the defining periods of my research, realizing that all over the ancient world, you had these incredible building enterprises, right? And when you first get into it, I certainly remember even as a kid being very interested when I would see images of Stonehenge, even getting almost like a feeling of something, something deep, something ancient, something soul stirring in its own way, right? But then as you come along and you begin to learn more and more about, I learned about the monumental earthwork architecture of North America. I learned about, the Mayan architecture of Central America. I learned about the Egyptians by the time I had gotten into my early 30s, I had looked at a broad spectrum of all of that. And what I took away from it was this impression that, okay, like I look at the Egyptian temples, and I've been to Egypt since then, but, had a chance to experience the temples myself, to Europe to visit the Gothic cathedrals, plus some of the ancient megalithic stuff there, to Central, to the Yucatan, to the Mayan. Well, okay, so you realize that, okay, if you look at pictures, say, of Mayan temples, right, stepped pyramids, you look at photographs of monumental earthwork architecture, you look at photographs of Greek temples, of Egyptian temples, the list goes on and on, the amazing architecture of Indochina. And then you realize that even though the outer expressions are diverse and very distinctive enough that with a little bit of education, you're easily going to differentiate, right, between these different expressions of, okay, but then you begin to realize over and over again that there are these commonalities, these themes tying them all together, right? So on the one hand, you've got, and this was realized early on, say even in the early 1900s by Norman Lockyer, was that Stonehenge and that complex there was astronomical in its layout. It was oriented to cosmic alignments, right? Well, since then, we've now discovered that archaeoastronomy has become a whole scientific subdiscipline in archaeology itself, right?
Yeah.
And it's what we're realizing is that people all over the ancient world for thousands of years built their sacred spaces, even their homes, their villages, their urban complexes, according to the pattern of cosmic and celestial alignments transposed to the earth. Then on top of that, they all seem to have, as we're now we're not so much up on this now, in the geological realm as we were in the astronomical realm. But we're now realizing that not only were these ancient builders sophisticated astronomers, they were also sophisticated geologists. And this is just recently, you may have heard about the discovery that the altar stone of Stonehenge was transported from the Orkneys at the north. Okay, well,
how far was that?
Between 460 and 500 miles. And you're having to transport a 12-ton stone over mountains, through heavily dense forests, across rivers, or you transport it by sea. Then the question becomes, okay, what kind of seaworthy craft were they, carrying this down the North Sea, which is famous for, the storms and the shipwrecks. And so no matter whether you went by land or by sea, this would have been an enormously challenging project to carry. But why would they go all the way up there, quarry a 12-ton stone, and go through all of the effort to transport it to southern England, set it up as the central stone on the midsummer sunrise alignment at Stonehenge? And why did they do that 4,500 to 5,000 years ago? Why did these nomadic hunter-gatherers or subsistence farmers find that was something that they should undertake to do? It makes no sense at all, but they did it. Now, here's the interesting part of that story is that generally the two types of stone that were used to build Stonehenge, the Sarsen stone circle, which is primarily a quartz-dense sedimentary rock, and the blue stones, which vary from igneous to sedimentary but have a lot of rhyolite in them. So you have distinct rings of stone and elements of the composition that are very distinctive types of rocks, easily identifiable. Then it turns out that it was believed that there was only the two types of rocks, the Sarsen sandstones, which were quarried from about, I think maybe the quarry for that was about 20 to 25 miles to the east. But, you're looking at some big old 20-ton stones. That's a huge project itself. The blue stones, it was believed, came from Wales primarily. But then it was realized that the altar stone was a very distinctive type of stone. It was different. So a couple of teams over a period of 3, 4, 5 years, the work's just been recently published since last summer, found out where that type of stone is located, and that was the very northern end of Scotland, right? Well, one of the things that made it easy to identify that stone and distinguish it from the Sarsen stones and the blue stones was its composition. It had a unique composition. It was very high in metal. And one of the metals that was quite prominent in it was barium. Now, it was commented that, the stone was unique by its metallic character and its high concentrations of barium. So that was one thing that was right. The other thing was, they're looking at it and going, gosh darn, if they hauled this 12-ton stone all the way from the northern Scotland to southern England, they must have had a compelling reason for doing so.
Why that stone?
But then there's no follow-up, like, well, maybe the composition of that stone, maybe the answer is in the composition of that stone. But you see, as soon as you accept that, Wayne, what's happening? If we accept that they had identified a certain type of stone 500 miles away from the building site, went to all of this effort to quarry that stone and get it to the building site, erect it in a prominent place within this pattern, within this design, within this configuration, and that is right there on the midsummer, most northerly sunrise of the sun, one day a year. There had to have been reasons. This is something that you can't just say, it was some kind of superstitious ceremony, and that's all we need to invoke for an explanation. See, if you accept the fact that not only were these people astronomers, not only were they engineers of incredible skill, they were also geologists. Well, now, you see, where are we coming with this? Well, we have to now, if we begin to take our framework of thinking in these terms, well, the conceptual leap is that, what we're looking at here is not just some ceremonial process that, hey, let's set up these big stones and we'll do pagan dances around them. No, the insight I think that comes from this is that what we're looking at is technology. We're looking at technology there. And when you realize that Stonehenge is part of a system, a complex that covers the entire British Isles, and then you realize that that complex extends beyond the British Isles into northwestern Europe. It extends from there around the shores of the Mediterranean, extends to the east all the way through the Middle East, through ancient Samaria and Babylonia, across through Turkey, all the way to Indochina. When you go to the west across the Atlantic Ocean, we discover the earthworks of North America. We discover the work of the Incas, the work of the Mayans, and we begin to understand that, wait a second, all of these different diverse cultures and diverse peoples, whatever their history was, whatever their ethnicity, whatever the cultural background, the milieu out of which they emerge, it appears that they're all working from the same template.
Yep.
The template of astronomy, the template of sacred geometry. Over and over again, we can demonstrate this continuity. Now,
well, Randall, just real quick, I'm wearing my shirt today that I got from Dennis Stone and hanging out with him.
Wait, with who?
Dennis Stone at America's Stonehenge.
Okay, is it up in
New Hampshire?
New Hampshire, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Scott Walter's been there. He's friends with Scott, and you know, we all seem to chew the fat with everybody, you know, in these circles. We're just kind of spread out. But you know, they have alignments from those structures there that go right to Stonehenge.
Uh-huh. I need to see that. I've heard that before, Wayne, but I haven't really seen
Scott Walter did an investigation on his show. What was it? America Unearthed, I believed.
Uh-huh. Okay.
And he went there, and Dennis Stone's son showed them on the computer where he went Google Maps and he did a straight line, and it was right through one of the standing stones and right into the middle of Stonehenge. Okay. Which means that, I mean, what I'm thinking, and one of our listeners and former guest on the show, and probably be a guest multiple times, he says that I thoroughly believe that Stonehenge and its original form was used as a portal to transfer individuals throughout the world. Maybe not individuals, but maybe thought, maybe information. Because I'm still of the belief that Earth is basically our ancient people, and you can run with this wherever you want. I could be completely crazy, but I think Earth was some type of a biochemical computer that these people knew how to tap into, and that these structures were there not only to bring the heavens down to the earth, but also tap into certain energies of that earth.
Well, you know that our planet is suffused with a geomagnetic field. And that geomagnetic field is variable. And that variability can be caused by a number of things, both things below and things above. So changes in the astronomical environment, the positions of the sun, the moon, the tides, and so on, that it can affect the geomagnetic field. But also the type of rock, the particular crystalline structure of the rock, the pressures and shear stresses created along fault lines, right, where you have adjacent rock masses shearing against each other, the movement of subterranean waters. All of these things combine to affect the geomagnetic field. We are enmeshed in the geomagnetic field. There is, let me see, I have a couple of books here. This is one that I read early on. Divining the Primary Source, Unfamiliar Radiation in Nature, Art, and Science. And it's all about the energy fields in which we move and exist, right? And these energy fields are subject to modulation. And I think that's a major component of trying to reconstruct or reverse engineer this lost technology, because I think that's what it is. I think this common stuff that was going on back then that makes no sense for people to undertake enterprises on such a grand and monumental scale just for some, superstitious ceremonial purpose that no archaeologist seems to be able to define. What is the ceremonies? Only because there's this linear view of history that we now are at the pinnacle of civilization, and everything that came before us of necessity was less sophisticated, less knowledgeable, less aware of natural law and natural forces and so on than we are. It's almost a kind of a hubris to think that we are at a stage now where there's not really any scientific insights that we can glean from our ancient ancestors. And I think that's totally wrong. And I think we are coming back full circle to realize, wait a minute, you know what? Our ancient ancestors, at least some of them, were way more sophisticated and knowledgeable than they've been given credit for. And we have to really reconsider history from that context. And when we do, a whole lot of things begin to make sense that didn't make sense before, because what I think of as the modern orthodoxy of ancient history is in this. They put themselves in a predicament. There's so much stuff now that doesn't fit their model. And for decades, they've been kind of, sweeping it under the rug. But it's gotten to the point now there's no more room under the rug. There's just too much stuff tumbling out in every direction. And we need to stop now and kind of look for a new order, a new pattern of our past. And when we do that with an open mind, we realize, oh my God, you know what? Maybe we're not as advanced as we thought we are relative to some of these whatever existed before us. And in fact, maybe we aren't the preeminent civilization that's ever inhabited this planet. Which brings us to another interesting question, which is the idea that if there was an ancient civilization, scientifically based, technologically based, but maybe utilizing science and technology that's completely different from our own, particularly in the technological manifestations of that science. And if we're looking to say, okay, there was no civilization in the past, and we're basically looking in a mirror, expecting to see some reflection of our own civilization that we've created, well, we might miss it. Because really, think about this. If we keep advancing, I think part of this advancement would be, obviously, an advanced civilization. One of the definitions of it would have to be a sustainable civilization. It would have to be able to integrate with the natural order on a long-term basis. Now, how do you do that? Well, if we were able to go for another 1,000 years without interruption, where we're basically moving in the direction of learning how to live sustainably on this planet, I think that when we reach a level of technological sophistication, we've in effect actually sort of full circle come back to creating almost like a garden paradise out of this planet, right? And I think we can already see the dim outlines of that emerging right now in terms of what we're learning about plasma physics and the potential manifestations of plasma as the fourth state of matter being the foundation of a whole different kind of technology that doesn't need all the apparatus that we've had to create in the infrastructure of our modern civilization. That being the case, what we might be looking at here is, again, the remnants. Now, a lot of the stuff, we're seeing that there are remnants of this ancient system that go back into the Ice Age. Absolutely. I mean, obviously, Göbekli Tepe is showing us that, right? It seems that somewhere around 4,000 to between 4,000 and 5,000 years ago, there was almost like a memo went out, hey, let's try to resurrect at least part of the system, right? And I think a lot of this, the first wave of this monumental building, first phases of Stonehenge, the first phases of the great monumental earthworks in North America, earliest waves of Mayan sacred architecture, the list goes on. They're all occurring simultaneous within the same few centuries. These things are going on in multiple places around the world.
Would it make sense that then these people that were trying to do this, exactly what you're saying, were the descendants of the survivors of something like the Younger Dryas and massive flood?
See what you're asking there is a really important and interesting question, Wayne, because and I can actually kind of go back to Plato on this, because in his dialogues in Atlantis, it's kind of made it clear that you kind of have basically two orders of survivors of the great catastrophes that we now know unequivocally are part of an intrinsic part of the natural history of this planet that we live on, right? Catastrophism now needs to be recognized and understood because we've created our civilization within a relatively small window between successions of catastrophes. And our challenge is to get to a point where we can essentially immunize ourselves, be in the position to be able to adapt or influence the outcome of the next catastrophe. And there will be others, absolutely. Once we understand the mechanisms, we go, okay, there's no reason to assume that these forces that have acted on this planet repeatedly for millions, hundreds of millions, even billions of years are no longer operational.
Right.
We have to assume they're operational. And we have to adapt our civilization and where we go with this to that realization, see? So we're in a situation now where we're realizing the potential that there might have been in existence once upon a time a planetary system. A planetary system. And for some reason, that planetary system was destroyed. It really, I mean, and you brought up now multiple times the Younger Dryas. The Younger Dryas, and let's go back to that because this is such an important part of the human story as well as the planetary story. The Younger Dryas is a period that lasted, now the dates place it from about 11,600 years ago to 12,900, about 1,300 years. It's been refined a little bit to less than 12,900, but in round numbers, that's close enough. 11.6 to 12.9, 1,300 years. The order of all nature, the planetary balance, was completely altered during that 1,300 years. However, there were an episode of foreshocks leading up to it, and a series of aftershocks, which I believe we're not through yet. In fact, I think that a lot of the volcanicity, the seismicity, and stuff that we experience in the planet today is still residual. It's still the working out of this major readjustment on all levels of the planet. You know.
Well, it's like here in Michigan, because we're the Michigan basin, we have that isostatic rebound that happens here, and we get earthquakes quite often. They're not much of anything, but it's that wanting to equalize that pressure from being pushed down by 2 miles of ice that's been on top of us. And it seems like it was, quickly released and is still working on it and trying to get nice and flat. But, it's like a hand into a cushion, right? I've heard that used so many times. I use it with my students. You take your hand, you push it into the cushion. Think of your hand as the ice sheet pushing down on the crust of the earth. Remove that hand and you'll see the cushion starts to want to equalize. And that's your isostatic rebound. And yeah, I think we're probably having that happen all over.
Oh yeah. And the origination of that metaphor that you're using may actually go back perhaps to the second Joe Rogan I was on, when I was explaining it to Joe, and I said, right now, Joe, you don't realize this, but your butt in this on your easy chair there is an example of isostatic depression.
Yes.
I use that metaphor. To my knowledge, that might be, Wayne, the first time historically that metaphor has ever been used.
Well, I guess, it had to be Joe Rogan's butt to do it. So
yeah. Well, Joe Rogan will go down in the annals of infamy as the man who demonstrated to the world at large the process of isostatic compensation.
That's right.
Yeah, I mean, you're exactly right, Wayne. You're exactly right. So we're in the phase now where I think we're trying to reverse engineer the ancient lost system. And I think now with the new breakthroughs in plasma physics and, coherent plasmoids, and I mean, for example, if we talk about the thunderstorm generator,
Oh,
right?
yes. Yeah.
Okay, so that's basically a system that if you study how it works, you can begin to see analogies to the ancient system. And I'll give you an example. If we look at the thunderstorm, I should actually pull up a slide here maybe to look at while we're.
Yeah. I can share it.
Yeah, let's see if I could pull up. Let's see, where do I have it here? Let me find a good one. Let's see what I've got here. Okay, let's see. Find an example. I'm scrolling through here. I've got images of where. Let's see. So you know about plasma. Do you know anything about plasma?
Sure. Superheated gas.
Yeah, it's a superheated gas. It's in what it is. It's
the fourth state of matter.
Yes, the fourth state of matter. It's what happens when you put enough energy into a molecular or atomic system that it completely disassociates the bonds between the electrons and the neutrons or the nucleus. That's what I'm trying to say. And
Right.
so what you now have is electrons and ions free floating. And once they've in this free floating stage, they now become electromagnetically conductive. And that's where the interesting part kicks in. And under certain conditions, those chaotic random motions, unstructured motion of the plasma self-organizes into toroidal geometries and then becomes self-sustaining in those geometries. Once there's something about that toroidal geometry, and you go, so now you have a plasmoid, which is a structured plasma. And it sure does look to me like that might be a major part of the ancient system. Okay, let me do this. Okay, how do we shoot? I mean, I know with StreamYard, I can share
see a
from my
present.
end.
A
Yeah,
present.
okay, so I'll do
Yep.
it. Got
And
it.
then I'll put it up on screen once I see it appear on my end.
Okay, I'm going to do share screen, and there will be screen 2. Allow. Okay, you should
Here
be
we
able
go.
to see it now. Okay.
There we go.
Okay, what we have here are some of the pieces, some of the components of a thunderstorm generator. Let me see. Actually, if I scroll, are you seeing the changes as
Yes.
I make?
Yes.
Oh,
Yep.
okay, good. Okay, so I'm going to just let's me go to a finished. Okay, so here's a schematic of a thunderstorm generator, and what you have is a series of concentric spheres and cylinders. And you've got an inlet in the sphere where this is ultimately based on something called, if people listening want to look it up, the Hiltz, the rank, RANQUE. All you have to put in just rank vortex tube. And the basic idea is the same with the thunderstorm generator. It's just that in the case of the rank Hiltz vortex tube, generally what you're doing is you're introducing air, typically at room temperature, into a swirl chamber, and then it's led into a cylinder, and it creates vortices. And this works in essentially the same way. There's an inlet that introduces flowing plasma into these spheres that sets it up rotating, and then once it's cohered into vortices, it's sent down the cylinder, right? However, to make the transition between the spherical movement, imagine a rolling ball of plasma. Now that has to cohere into a vortex, and that vortex is now channeled down this cylinder. But the problem is when you make this transition from spherical geometry to cylindrical geometry, if you just punch a hole in the cylinder and stick a pipe in there, well, what's going to happen is that configuration induces turbulence into the plasma swarm that interferes with its ability to cohere into vortices. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So through empirical experimentation, it was learned that certain transitional angles were particularly efficient at minimizing the introduction of turbulence into this plasma stream that's moving from a spherical to cylindrical, right? And in the cylinder, it's a coherent vortex. Almost imagine a tornado on its side, right?
Yep.
Okay, now let's go back here to this. You'll see that two of the transition pieces are right here. These collars, the transition from spherical to cylindrical. There's a couple of them that have optimum angles between the rim, the circle that forms the upper rim, and the circle that forms the lower rim. This one here is carefully tooled, machined to an angle here from the upper rim to the lower rim of 51.84 degrees. Does that ring a bell?
54.8?
No, 51.84.
Isn't that the angle of the Giza pyramid?
Yes.
Well, here's Randall, you're blowing my mind here, because when you're showing me these pieces of the generator here, I'm just immediately taken back to images that I've seen of what people are saying are some type of a water basin or something along those lines along they're laying, they almost look like a mold outside the pyramids.
Oh, okay.
Do you know what I'm talking about?
No,
oh my God.
this is new to me.
I'll see if I can find it.
Okay.
So keep going.
Well, so this is just, only the tip of the iceberg here, but this is actually an industrial scale thunderstorm generator that was retrofitted to a 300 kilowatt Perkins generator on a substation outside of London that feeds into the London power grid. This thing has been tested now repeatedly. We've got repeated tests now of the functioning of the thunderstorm generator that have confirmed that it works. It basically works. And it's no longer controversial about does it work or does it not work. The controversy now is how the hell does it work?
Right.
That's really where it's coming down to. And it's something we've just discovered. I mean, it may be in a parallel to going back to the late 1800s and the discovery of electricity, especially alternating current electricity. Like, how does this work? And really, in some respects, we don't really even know how it works, but it works, right? And so we've created a whole civilization that uses alternating current electricity, and we built a whole technology that's basically the confluence of fossil fuel-derived energy and the production of electricity. And that's what we built our civilization on. What we may have here is a methodology of building an alternate type of civilization that looks very different from our own. But this one, actually, I can show you as we go through here. Let me speed up to, here we go. This is, all right.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, this is being lifted.
That is amazing.
I don't know if you're hearing it.
No.
Not getting any audio? Yeah, okay. We probably have to mess with the settings. But anyways, this thing was installed. I'm going to fast forward through here. And to see the final, here we go. Here's the final installation of the thunderstorm generator, which is one of the three components. You've got a pre-ionizing chamber that excites the electrons of the gases or the plasmas coming into the system that allows, if I understand this correctly, it allows for the creation of the introduction of a lower temperature to create this total disassociation of electrons from the nucleus. But anyways, you've got the pre-ionization chamber, and then you've got what we kind of colloquially call the bubbler, where billions of these small symmetrical bubbles are created through alternating pressure and vacuum, that the vacuum sucks water up into this cylinder filled with water with a diffuser stone in the bottom and a special kind of a steel wool filling also in the water-filled column. And by bringing those billions of bubbles up through there and reducing them in size, because the bigger the bubble, the more tendency they're going to be to become asymmetrical. And to generate, to extract the energy from these bubbles, cavitation bubbles, you have to have perfect symmetry. And then what happens, and I think I'll stop sharing here, is go back. So you've got this bubble, and it collapses on its own axis. Imagine a sphere, spinning sphere, that has a north and a south pole, and it has an equator. Now imagine that we can take that perfectly spherical bubble and collapse it so that the North Pole meets the South Pole in the equator, right? Now, something really remarkable happens when you do this with water, is because now this creates this toroidal-shaped collapsing bubble, causes the plasma to self-organize into this coherent form of a torus. When that happens, something else happens. It creates this vorticular motion, and this is hard to show, but without a 3D model. But if you can picture that sphere like a beach ball, and the North Pole and the South Pole collapse and they meet. Now what happens is you've got this indentation, right? A North Pole indentation and a South Pole indentation, and now these coherent plasmoids begin to stream in this vortex that moves towards the equator, and they're moving in opposite polarity.
Right.
And they're speeding up as they go down, and when they reach that equator, the 0 point, that's where the magic happens. And I don't know really what. I'm still trying to understand what happens after that point. But at that point, one can begin to draw energy from the system. At that point, you now get the potential to break down the atomic structure of anything else that's in that system and reconstitute it with a different atomic structure. So in the thunderstorm generator, what's happening is that when you attach it, let's say, to an internal combustion engine that's producing effluents, whether it's carbon dioxide, carbon monoxide, nitrogen oxides, particulate matter, oxygen. Typically, when you run your car, and this is just one application, one potential application out of this technology. When you run your car, what's typically coming out of the exhaust? Well, it might be 9, 10, 12% carbon dioxide and carbon monoxide, maybe 4%, 5% oxygen, in parts per million, nitrogen oxides, a couple of hundred parts per million, et cetera, right? Now, if you capture those effluents, whatever's coming out of the exhaust pipe of your generator, your internal combustion engine, doesn't matter whether it's running on gasoline, petrol, whether it's running on diesel, whether it's running on kerosene, whether it's running on natural gas, none of that matters. But you capture whatever is coming out of the exhaust pipe and you feed it back into the system. What then comes out is pure unpolluted air. Pure unpolluted air. And
that's crazy.
It is crazy. And I mean, we could go back to, let me see, I think I have a printout of one of the tests. Yeah, let's see. Yeah, here we go. Let me do a share screen again.
Yeah.
Let me go.
Well, and I found those basins that I was talking to you about too. So after you share your stuff, I want you to take a look at these images.
Okay. All right. Okay, here we go. So let's see. Share screen. Share screen. Okay. Did it work?
No, nothing's come through yet.
Nothing's up yet.
Okay, so let me try it again, and we'll get it. Patience, everyone. Patience.
I think everybody's good with that.
Screen sharing. Let's see. 3. Yeah, okay.
So by
here
the
we go,
way,
zero
while
to-
Randall's working on that, everybody, just want to thank a bunch of people. So Sir Brian Bowden, thank you for the super chat. You guys are awesome. T-Bone, again, 10 gifted memberships. Thank you so much. We really appreciate that. And a new member, and Joanne. Thank you for joining us. And we do have your questions start, and we will try to get some Q&A going with Randall here in just a little bit. All right, Randall.
All right, here we go.
Here it is.
Here it is. This was a Honda generator tested last summer. July 23rd. So this was one of the early tests. So
Okay.
you can see the result of it. Now, basically what we're going to look up at the top up here. Don't even bother to look at the bottom yet. But you've got 5 different effluents here, 5 different gases. You've got carbon dioxide, carbon monoxide, oxygen, other hydrocarbons. So this could include methane, ozone, and stuff. And then this would be nitrous oxides. Now, if we go through percentages here, carbon dioxide, you'll see is 9.3%. Now, this is before, so that what you have here is a retrofitted generator. The generator is turned on first and allowed to warm up. And then you turn the thunderstorm technology on, right? So all of this at 11 minutes, 53 seconds after 10 a.m., 9.3% of the effluents were carbon dioxide. 5.48 was carbon monoxide. 4.66 was oxygen. And parts per million of hydrocarbons was 199. And of nitrogen oxides was 27. Now, this is at 10:11:53. Now, a few minutes later, this is just before, now the technology is turned on. At 39 seconds, 15 minutes after 10, look what's happened to the carbon dioxide.
Totally gone.
Look what happened to carbon monoxide.
Yep. Gone.
Look what happens to the oxygen.
the exhaust gas is now oxygen.
And look at your other hydrocarbons have been reduced substantially. This is like almost 75% reduced. Same here. Where did this stuff go? What happened to it? Now, here's something to bear in mind. If you were to walk out, and my friend George who did the annealing on the thunderstorm generators, made this analogy. He said if you walk out on a pristine mountain meadow, blooming with flowers and sweet, unpolluted air, fresh air, optimum for human consumption, what percentage of oxygen is optimum? Well, between 20 and 21%.
Yep.
Look at that. Now, there's a number of questions raised here. So essentially, what's coming out of the exhaust is now pure unpolluted air. And I've been around these things, and a lot of other people now over the last 2 years, since these things have now been tested in public forums. You're on stage, turn the generator on, and within seconds, the doggone thing has to be moved off stage out onto the loading dock because the fumes coming out are
right.
Yep. Turn it on when the thunderstorm generator is on. Air is coming out.
That's amazing. And this technology is coming from the ideas of sacred geometry and
sacred geometry has a huge role to play in this. Why? Because geometry seems to be at the very essence and core of this ability of randomized chaotic plasmas to self-cohere into these organized plasmoid structures. And this, I think, brings up another factor, another component of the ancient science / technology, is that they use geometry as a means of influencing and manipulating subtle energies and forces, even affecting what I think actually is alchemical transmutation here.
Yes. Yeah. That it's amazing stuff. Absolutely. So I want to show you really quick, Randall, what I was talking about with these basins. And as soon as you'll see it, you'll go, oh, yeah. So hopefully this image will look those.
Well, let's see. Can we enlarge that a little bit on my, well, okay, now I can see it. So large alabaster basins. Oh, at Abu Ghraib.
Yep. So this is Nasir's Sun Temple, Abu Ghraib.
So, yeah, this is. Let's see.
With a diameter of about 120 centimeters and a depth of about 50 centimeters. From outside, it looks like a cuboid measuring 55 centimeters in width and 76 centimeters in height. And when you were showing me those parts of the thunderstorm generator, my mind went exactly to these. I don't know why, but it made me think of, they say they're basins. And my first thought when I first saw them was that they were some type of mold that the Egyptians might have been using. But now I'm wondering if these were some type of a vortex generator.
20 centimeters. Well, I couldn't give you an informed opinion on this because this is relatively new to me, but the first thing I see there, the sphericality of it, and the fact that this spherical, if you want to call it that, a swirl chamber in the Rank-Hilch vortex tube, it's called a swirl chamber, where the gases are introduced. And I should probably show a diagram of a vortex tube and how it works a little bit. I think I've got one right here. If let's see here. Yes, I do. I guess I'll just go back and present again. Share screen. All right. I'm getting the hang of this. Finally. Let's see. Okay, now I can do it. Look how quickly I'm doing this now.
There it is.
Damn, I'm getting
All right, let's pull this up. Oh, yeah, I've seen this. Yep.
So this is your swirl chamber here, and you'll notice it's cubical rather than spherical. And I think the spherical probably makes a difference. But your air supply is coming in at a high pressure, really high pressure, right? Many atmospheres. And it automatically sets up this swirl. And what they're calling here the vortex spin chamber. So this is where the initial spin is induced into the whirling gas. In this case, it's just air at room temperature. And it begins to, so the compressed air, like down here, 80 to 100 pounds per square inch, which is 5.5 to 6.9 bar, it's ejected tangentially through a generator into the vortex spin chamber, right? At up to 1 million RPMs.
That's
up to
insane.
million RPMs. This airstream revolves toward the hot end, which is down here, where some escapes through this, what's called the control valve. Now, because the hot air is to the outside of the cylinder, what this cone here does is it allows the air, the whirling air at the outside of the cylinder to pass through. And why exactly it does this, the inner air gets reversed 180 degrees and sets up an inner vortex that's now whirling in the opposite direction within the outer hot vortex. And as it moves towards the other end, it's discharged at the cold air end.
So you got hot air spinning around cold air, which is going in the opposite direction.
Yes. And this thing, look, it has no moving parts. It's throughout. It's used in systems that are, to cool nuclear reactors. It's used in the air conditioning industry. And there's a lot of speculation and ideas about exactly how it works. And I don't know if there's really a consensus of how it works because there's a lot of different ideas. But let's go to this one. This is interesting. It says here, now this is from Wikipedia, the vortex tube, also known as the Rank-Hilch vortex tube, is a mechanical device that separates the compressed gas into hot and cold streams. The gas emerging from the hot end can reach temperatures of 200 degrees centigrade. That's 390 degrees Fahrenheit. And the gas emerging from the cold end can reach minus 60 degrees Fahrenheit. So you introduce air at room temperature, and now you've got a difference there of what? 390, 450 degrees difference.
Right.
Now, the thunderstorm generator is operating on a similar principle. One difference is instead of the cold just moving inside the hot, which it's doing, there's no separation between the two vortices in the Rank vortex tube. In the thunderstorm generator, each one has its own cylinder. And it's discovered that, like, the more, if you have, for example, if you have one sphere and one cylinder, it's not going to be that effective. If you have two cylinders and concentric, and two spheres concentric, two cylinders concentric, now the streams of plasma are actually separated from each other, right? Then if you introduce the third one, now it gets extremely powerful. What happens? It creates implosive forces as contrasted with explosive. There's some really interesting connotations and implications to that, which probably is beyond the scope of what we're talking about here today. But it was discovered again, just like with the angle of the collar between the sphere and the cylinder being 51.84, it was discovered that the ratios of the radii of the spheres and the cylinders would be in the sequence 432. Now, 432.
432. That's 9.
Yes, it is 9.
And what'd you say? 51.84, right?
51.84. Yeah.
Is that not 9 as well?
Well, 51 is 6 plus 8 is 14 plus 4 is 18.
1 and 8 is
9. Yeah.
Yeah. Imagine that. The very end of the number line.
Well, then you got to understand that, like, when I do a sacred geometry course, I introduce people to not only the forms, but also the numbers that are generated from those forms. And 432 is one of the fundamental working numbers in the ancient cosmological system. It's at the core of the king lists of the Sumerian king lists. It's at the core of the Vedas. You know that that the Kali Yuga, 432,000 years. The totality of the king lists, the total reigns, 432,000 years. The Maha Yuga, 4,320,000 years. But it goes more than that because, see, again, what we're dealing here with is frequencies. And 432 cycles per second gives you A, the note A, and if you go 432 to 864, you now have an octave within that particular scale, musical scale, which I think, I don't know what the name of that is, rather than the Doric scale or the scale that's used now where it's 440 to 880. There's an alternate scale that has been used throughout history from 432 to 864. And so that whole series of octaves is ultimately based upon a frequency of 432 cycles per second. And that number is found over and over and over again in the ancient cosmological traditions, and it's also found in nature. So it's not just an arbitrary number at all. But so it's interesting that, yes, the numerical relations and the forms and patterns of sacred geometry are integral to this whole system of plasma technology. Absolutely. And because of that, that makes me, understand that what I've tried to do is bring together as many components as I can of what the operational aspects of this ancient technological system may have been. One of the things that, I've you're probably familiar with dowsing.
Oh, yeah. Yep.
Yeah, and we brought up, when I showed you this book right here, divining is another name for dowsing.
Yep.
Unfamiliar radiation. Well, I think that there's a link between these unfamiliar radiations in nature, art, and science, and the forms and patterns of sacred geometry and the relations that we find there. And I just gave, one example. Another, Let's see.
No, well, what do you think about this? I 100% agree with you with everything you're saying about sacred geometry and everything. It just so happens as well that you can code history, science, all of this stuff based on sacred geometry. So just by building a structure within that, you encode sacred geometry and those numbers and why you build something the way that you do.
Mm-hmm.
So
well, that's exactly right. That's exactly right.
Like is it 144,000
redeemed of the earth?
Yes. Yeah.
So that is the whatever that means, the redeemed of the earth. I mean, we might take it as being,
but it's a scale.
Oh yeah, yeah.
If you scale, if you scale up the Great Pyramid of Giza, it gives you the measurements of the northern hemisphere of the Earth.
Yes, but the scale is 432.
Oh. Well, see, there you go.
Well, yeah, 43,200 times the height and base perimeter measurement of the pyramid gives you the scale of the one hemisphere of the Earth.
And then depending on where you're measuring from, either the socle or the base of the actual pyramid will give you the difference in the latitude and longitude.
Yes.
They've known about this planet. These people knew about these planets, or the planet and the measurements of this planet and getting around on it way before when we reboot it. And I don't know what happened during the Dark Ages or whatever, but this is this exact same stuff that makes me question everything at this point. It just,
well, yeah,
it makes,
you have to question. Well, you have to question.
You're not allowed to. I mean, when I was in college and I asked my instructor, when I was in my paleontology class for my earth science degree, and I said, how in the world could all of these species of animals be eaten and killed by humans? Well, we have three ideas: ill, chill, or kill. It got cold, they got sick, and humans ate them. I said 180 in some species, especially like a terror bird or a short-faced bear, that would totally destroy you if you came at it, even with a bunch of people. It makes no sense. You wouldn't do high risk for low reward,
Right. No, that's never, that model of extinction has never made sense to me.
Yeah.
Even before I had taken a deep dive into the details, the first time I think I ever heard about that, early mid 70s, was like, I don't know, that doesn't seem to make sense. How many people were there? How many woolly mammoths were there? And subsequent to that, I've learned some things. Like, for example, I've looked, population of the Earth, human population, late Pleistocene. And what I kept coming up with is estimates of 5 to 10 million people, right? Well, going back to the 1940s and 50s even, when some of the early estimates, like, say, just the species of mammoths in the world was 10 to 12 million woolly mammoths. Okay. So now if let's say that there's 10 million mammoths and 10 million people, and of those 10 million people, that's total aggregate. Of those 10 million people, you've got to take out the children. The women are not out hunting. The elderly are not out hunting. You've got, what, a quarter of the population that's going to be capable of being out there actually hunting and taking down big game. I mean, like you just said, danger would be key. I mean, if you're, look, when you consider all of the smaller animals that were available, you got to go, why were they going after the biggest, most dangerous ones, right? Well, leave that question aside. Here's the point. If you got, let's say, allow 25% of 10 million people, that's 2.5 million people. Well, it means that the mammoths alone completely outnumbered the number of people capable of hunting them. So how do you exterminate every woolly mammoth on Earth, from Siberia to Beringia to the Arctic to, unglaciated North America all the way down to Tierra del Fuego. Within 1,000 years, maximum.
Right.
Well, I mean, what do you got? I mean, that would be hard to do if you had trained soldiers with machine guns,
right?
Just sweeping down, killing everything in sight. It makes no sense. Anyway.
Well, you can't talk about that though. It's in the books, so you just go with it. And that's the problem. And people are waking up to this stuff.
Well, yeah, you see, gradualism, or in its more technical term, uniformitarianism.
Yeah.
Wayne, say that really quick 3 times now.
Uniformitarianism.
Hey, I was pretty good.
Yeah. Well, that's just
that
like, what
impressive.
Is it? Aeolian, Fluvian, Artesian. What was Aeolian?
No, no. Aeolian was like
about the Carolina Bays, correct?
Yeah. Now you've got me. Yeah, that was the theory. It was the complex theory. It was called.
Right. Wind, water.
Well, it was. Gosh, now you made me forget because you said Aeolian. The wind was like the last. It was. Oh, okay. Artesian. No. Solution. Artesian. Or was it artesian first? Artesian first.
Right.
Solution, because that's your artesian aquifer.
Right. The artesian
coming up
well.
under pressure. So the artesian aquifer, solution, so you dissolve the stuff. Lacustrine, meaning lake. It then turns into a lake. And finally, Aeolian, the wind blows over the lake and turns it into this perfect ellipse with prominent dunes all on the same sides.
Right. Instead of just saying it's probably an impact crater.
Well,
a very small one.
I don't, at this point, I don't know what it is. I don't know.
They
what
are
it
weird.
They
those
are weird.
Carolina Bays are very strange.
Yes, they are. And very early on, I got very interested. Well, not long after I moved to Georgia, I learned about the bays. Well, let's see, I moved here in 74. No, actually, I probably didn't learn about the bays until 78 or 79. And I first learned about them in a book called, by Otto Mook, German physicist, wrote a book called The Secret of Atlantis. And, in your early explorations, I want to know, okay, what's the deal with Atlantis? I remembered when I was about 9 or 10 going to the movie theater and seeing a movie about Atlantis that was probably could have gotten an award for being one of the cheesiest movies of the decade. But I recall that. Then I recalled a song by, remember Donovan and the song Atlantis? Are you old enough to remember that?
No.
Oh, yeah. You know Donovan?
Yeah.
Donovan, he was an English folk singer who had a couple of pretty prominent pop hits in the mid to late 60s. They called him kind of like the British Bob Dylan. Okay.
Gotcha.
Well, he wrote this song about Atlantis that fairly popular, I guess, 69, 70, something like that, right in there, 71. Carolina Bays. Yes.
There you go, people. Just so if you're wondering what we're talking about, look at these things.
Yeah. They're like big fingerprints.
Yeah.
And you can see on this, look at the big one up here. You see on the southeast, you've got that prominent raised. No, go up to the big one up in the upper left. But yeah, there. Oh, well, you can see it on the other one too. You were just showing it.
Yeah.
And then you go up to those little 3 in a row there in the middle, particularly. You see now to me, any theory of the origin of these things has to explain that common theme of the Carolina Bays. So I had first heard about these in this book, The Secret of Atlantis, and I kind of got off on a digression here. There was a lot of talk about Atlantis back in the 60s. It was part of that whole, cultural milieu back then.
Yeah.
That it suddenly became a topic of popular conversation, particularly among the younger people who were exploring alternative realities and spiritual traditions and all of that. Anyways, I decided I'm going to look into this Atlantis thing. I finally came around to reading 3 or 4 books, including the books by Ignatius Donnelly, who had been a congressman from Minnesota, so who I am told ran for Congress, won a congressional seat, but it was all part of his bigger plan to get to Washington, to where he would have access to the library there, the Library of Congress.
Yeah.
And he spent all of his spare time in the Library of Congress, and the result of that was his 2 books about Atlantis. And I read those, and I read a couple of others. This one by Cedric Leonard, which is the first place I heard about the great scabland floods of the Pacific Northwest, and the book by Otto Mook, The Secret of Atlantis, which was the first place I ever heard about the Carolina Bays. And I got very interested in them to the point where I really began to do serious research. I went, and they're not far from here. The DeKalb County has a science center that's for all of the DeKalb County schools to use. And they have displays and stuff, but they have a really good science library there, right? They have a lot of the journals, that the mainstream science journals and all of that. But so I went in there and I started researching the Carolina Bays. And oh, look, I got that book. Which book? Which book are we talking about? Otto Mook's book? Or is that the one? Otto Mook?
I'll put it up when he responds.
Yeah, cool.
Yeah. Otto Mook, he says.
Oh, okay.
Yep.
There we go. Jeff, this is Jeff.
Jeff up north, probably a Youper. Are you a Youper? Up in the Upper Peninsula?
Oh, a Youper. I was going to
say,
okay.
That's what we call our northern kin.
Oh, okay.
They're very different types of people up there.
Okay.
Yep, so, he says you betcha. Yep. Yeah, he's
you betcha. Okay.
Yeah.
He is the true up north.
Yes. He is the true up north.
Yeah. Well, what was his name? Jeff?
Jeff, yeah.
Yeah, Jeff. Okay. Well, that's cool. You got that book on my recommendation. So I'm already having an evil influence on people.
Oh, man.
Recommending books that they're going out, subversive books, right? Hey. So anyways, that's where I first heard about the Carolina Bays, and here was his theory. His theory was that Atlantis was destroyed by the impact, the hypervelocity impact of a 6-mile asteroid into the Atlantic Ocean.
Okay.
As it's coming in at a low angle from the northwest, it begins to break apart. It begins to fragment, and all of these fragments crash down on the southeastern coastal plain and produce the Carolina Bays, while the main core of the thing smashed into the Atlantic Ocean, and the tsunami waves and the shock of this thing hitting the ocean is what caused the great seismic events that resulted in the collapse of Atlantis. That was his basic theory.
Yeah.
So I went in and I started researching using this Fernbank Science Library, and I got to know the librarian over there, and it turned out that several of the scientists that worked there at the science center were interested in the research that I was doing, because I was coming up there 2 or 3 days a week. After work, I would go in there, and sometimes I'd be there till closing, poring over the books and the journals. And then, because the librarian got really interested in my research, back then there was I couldn't just go online and download something,
Correct.
Like I do now. Yep. You had to actually physically go to a library, right? Can you imagine that? Physically,
I used to do it all the time.
Yeah. But I would go there and I would go, hey, there's this article that they're referring to here that's really interesting research, but you don't have it here. And she said, oh, no problem. Let me go in, and she would type in, and she would network with all these universities all over in Europe, all over the U.S. She would type in the name of the journal article I'm looking for, come back, and then she'd say, okay, such and such place have it. I'll go ahead and order it. Yeah. And they had a budget that was allocated for people, even the public at large, students, whatever, to come in there and be able to use the system, the interlibrary loan. And let's say that there was a charge of $2.50 to get it printed and sent, physically sent, right? Not digitally, physically. But they had an allocation for that, and nobody was using it except me. She says, we got to use this. So at no cost to me, I'm getting this stuff from all over the world. I got a hold, you may have seen the book called The Mysterious Carolina Bays by Henry Savage.
Sounds familiar,
I
yeah.
think it came out, if you look it up, you can tell. I think it came out in 86, 87, The Mysterious Carolina Bays by Henry Savage. So they had that book in the library and plus they had a lot of the journals in their stacks, in their archives. They had a lot of the older journals going back to the 30s and 40s where some of the early research was being done on the Carolina Bays. And you had the two conflicting models of Carolina Bay formation. You had the terrestrials who believed, like when we were talking about the complex theory, the artesian solution lacustrine Aeolian hypothesis. Well, that was kind of the essence of the terrestrial. And then you had the celestials who said, no, this can be better explained by hypervelocity impacts of like either a fragmenting comet or an asteroid or something like that. So that battle raged for a couple of decades. And then the two principals, Douglas Johnson, who was, he was like a big authority in geomorphology. He was the dean. Somewhere he was at Harvard or one of the upper crust northeastern. I don't remember which one. And the other one was William Prouty, but he was like a small midwestern. So I mean, Johnson, the defenders of the gradualist model, had the big guns on his side, but Prouty had the evidence. He had a much more coherent explanation. But they battled out for about 20 years. I think they both passed away in the 50s, and then the controversy, terrestrial versus celestial origin, passed with them. And and it kind of got revived a little bit here and there. But Savage's book, did you find it?
Yes, it's The Mysterious Carolina Bays. It came out January 1st of 1982, and you can buy it on Amazon used for $180.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
108. Well, I mean, it's rare and it's got higher demand. Yeah. But they had that book and in fact, I never bought the book itself, but I was able to check it out of the library. In fact,
this is signed, by the way.
Oh, is it?
Yeah, okay. It's from a used bookstore. So
that probably adds $100 to the cost.
Probably.
But I, did what we did back in those days. I photocopied the book.
Sure.
So I've got the photocopies right in it's probably in my geology shelf up here to my right. Or no, it might be on my impact. It's probably on my impact shelf over here to my left.
You got the impact over here, the geology over here.
Uh-huh.
What else do you have hiding around there?
Well, let's see. Back here, that's all my sacred geometry books.
Ooh.
And I got an amazing sacred geometry library. Over here, I've got books on alchemy, on mythology. Like that whole shelf right there is probably all mythology from around the world. Of course, the well-known ones, Carl Jung and the hero's journey. Who I'm talking about. And Mircea Eliade, he wrote a bunch. Those are the core, but a lot of other stuff too. Books on Kabbalah down here, shelf. The bottom shelf down here is all books about Freemasonry, the history, the symbolism and stuff. Back there is books about, mainly, I'm very interested. One of my main interests, Wayne and Michelle, is how do we take this knowledge and once we've kind of re-engineered it to the point where we can actually begin to utilize it, what do we do with it? Well, I think that one of the things is we can begin to alter the whole outer expression of our civilization. We can begin to create a more harmonious world by adapting some of those ancient principles to our own modern world. And that's really where I want to go with it, ultimately.
Yeah.
So my interest in now for the next year or two is to actually develop a prototype using the principles of that were in use in the ancient system, but not slavishly mimicking the ancient system, but adapting it to our own world. And I'm of the mind now that the plasma technology is going to give us the ability to reduce our consumption of fossil fuels by easily 80 to 90% easily. And I, for one, personally don't want to end all fossil fuel use and injection of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere, because if you go back during this, what we call the Pleistocene epoch, which is 2.5 million years roughly, we're on the tail end of the Pleistocene, the Holocene. Okay, the dividing line between the two is the Younger Dryas. So we've got 2.5 million years of history that essentially is on the other side of the Younger Dryas. And everything that we think of as history, everything that we think of as the rise of civilization is on this side of the Younger Dryas.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's a really good point.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I'm just thinking that, we love simple explanations and clear-cut delineation of this, then this, that in the Younger Dryas, it's like all thought process stops at that point where it talks about, other than Neanderthal and other things, it seems like everything it's like a law. We don't talk further behind that because, well, there's, they use the excuse that there's no evidence. And I don't know. I mean, I was just reading on these articles about Mount Toba, the super volcano, 71 to 74,000 years ago. And we were down to 3,000 or 10,000 human survivors at that time. Now, humans were recovering from 74,000 years ago to that part of the Younger Dryas, probably very advanced. They had the same brain size and everything else. They rebuilt again, became very advanced, and then boom, now we have something happens where now we have 150 plus flood myths, and all of this stuff is left behind, these megalithic blocks and stuff, and we've started again.
Well,
and
that's the way
go ahead.
Well, I would say kind of the way I expressed it, it's like the rebooting of civilization is an alternate way of looking at it. And
well, but before, we're getting late here, and before I let you go, I've got to be a little selfish and bring up the Michigan thing. And I want to see what your thoughts are, how this would, let me go ahead and share the screen for everybody. This is the article we talked about on last week's show, but I just have to find it. There we go. Archaeologist right here. Okay. So this is archaeologist. Now this has been in the works. There's been rumblings about this for years, but it's finally making the mainstream. It takes years, science progresses one dead scientist at a time, but archaeologists discover 9,000-year-old Stonehenge-like structure in Lake Michigan. And this is somewhere in the Grand Traverse Bay. And it talks about how it's 40 feet. The structure lies 40 feet below the surface of Lake Michigan, while it's smaller than its namesake, yada, yada. And this is an image of it, which is very interesting to say the least. What is this
in the background that looks like a bridge with elliptical arches?
I have no idea what that is.
Doesn't it look almost like a boat?
It says that
like a ship.
It does. And maybe that's a sunk ship that they used for the picture of the Grand Traverse Bay,
or a bridge. But it's when you scroll further down.
Yeah. So as I go down, and we go here, and it talks about there is a rock. One of the stones in particular has captured the spotlight, measuring 3.5 to 4 feet tall and 5 feet wide. It bears a carving of a mastodon, offering a glimpse into a time when these ancient creatures roamed the area. All right. Now, this is the actual Situated approximately 40 feet below Lake Michigan, glistening water within the heart of Grand Traverse Bay, this enigmatic discovery, discovery,
Enigmatic.
enigmatic. There we go.
Enigmatic.
Okay, I'll
You
take
can
your
work
word
on
for it.
that, and if I ever
Yeah.
come back on, I'll
I'm
be
from
expecting
Michigan.
you to know. Oh, well, okay, so that excuses you.
We
then.
put
Yeah.
S's on everything.
Don't
and-
worry, I'm going to have him say it 10 times after the show.
All right, Miss English and speech and mythology teacher. But anyways, it talks about these stones are estimated to be about 9,000 years old,
Well,
predating Stonehenge by 4,000 years.
Uh-huh.
This period follows the end of the Ice Age and the formation of Grand Traverse Bay. But I thought all the Great Lakes and everything were from the forward and retreating, forward, advancing, retreating, advancing,
Well, yeah.
retreating.
So what? There's an implication here.
So-
One is that obviously this thing couldn't have been built until the glaciers had permanently receded from that area.
But wouldn't
Right.
it have flooded it?
Well, yes, I'm assuming so. Now, I did research on this years ago. The first time I ever heard about
See? Yeah.
it. I bet it's been 10 years since I first heard about this. If we do another repeat to this, I can dig up my original research because what I did was correlate it with the advances and retreats of the glaciers. Tried to come up with a timeline that made sense. And
Right.
as I recall, I was never satisfied like I had really gotten it. Because for one thing, like if there's, let's see that. Yeah, that's a mastodon. Clearly,
Yeah.
look at the profile of the skull. That's a
Right there.
mastodon right there. Okay, so
Yeah.
that's on one of the stones?
Yes, but they outlined it. You can see it, but they outlined it so you can see everything underwater.
Yeah.
Right.
But
So
but
it's enhanced. It's enhanced.
it's enhanced, but I mean it sure does look like a mastodon.
Well, yeah, they are calling it out now. They used to say, "Oh, that's pareidolia," and da 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 da, and then they would shuffle it away. But now they're releasing this and they're highlighting it and saying, "Hey, and this is a doctor and a professor here in I think Northwestern Michigan University who dives on this site and
So
has been pushing it. I don't
now,
9,000 years.
well, to my knowledge, mastodons were totally extinct by 9,000 years ago.
Yes.
And maybe that's where I ran into the stumbling block. I couldn't find consistent evidence that allowed me to say, okay, this is when it was built. Because if these people had seen mastodons, then we're having to go back 12,000 years ago or longer.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
Now, it is possible that one of the things that occurred at the Younger Dryas, let's go 12,900 years ago, was this sudden climatic catastrophe where if you go back a couple of thousand years before that, you had this period of gradual warming that caused a pretty substantial shrinkage of the glaciers from their maximum size, which occurred 16 to, say, 22,000 years ago. What was called the late glacial maximum. Okay, so around 15,000 years ago, the planet warmed and the glaciers shrank. And the great Cordilleran ice sheet that was over western North America and the Laurentide that was centered over Hudson Bay, at the late glacial maximum, they had met and merged together. When the warming came, it was called the Balling-Alerod warming. When that occurred, the glaciers shrank in size and a corridor opened up between. This is what has been referred to as the ice-free corridor. Now, that would have occurred between 13 and 15,000 years ago, probably. That's when the maximum southern extent of the ice sheets would have contracted back to the north and basically perhaps uncovered the southern part of Lake Michigan Basin and left what is now below the lake
Okay.
But the problem, though, we run into
Uh-huh.
is as the ice sheet melts back, you're going to have a very substantial proglacial lake forming in front. Now, which then suggests to me, okay, it couldn't have been built then because a lot of the flooding, too, probably would have washed it away. It
Yeah.
wouldn't have survived the flooding. So it had to have been built when that lake bottom was above, right, subsequent to the floods. So now, how do we explain the mastodon? Unless, is that evidence that there were still mastodons in North America 9,000 years ago? I don't know. Because we've never found an actual specimen that dates to that age.
Right.
Right. Or were there traditions of mastodons that had been handed down and people, drawing pictures of them and et cetera, et cetera. And people just knew about mastodons because maybe they're even finding remains of mastodons.
Right. Maybe sharing stories through the tribes.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So that's kind of where I left it.
Yeah.
That's kind of where I left it. Unless, we get hard evidence that there were actually mammoth mastodons extant 9,000 years ago, I would lean towards what you just described.
Yeah. And then it just says here, similar stone structures in the vicinity provide tantalizing clues about the purpose of the Grand Traverse Bay arrangement. Dr. John O'Shea or maybe it's O'Shea,
I think
from
it's O'Shea.
From the University of Michigan, has studied a rock formation in Lake Huron dating back 9,000 years, situated at 120 feet below the surface along the Alpena Amberley Ridge. This stone assemblage is believed to have been used for ancient hunting practices, possibly to channel caribou.
Okay.
I mean, that's interesting.
Well,
but yeah, so
I'm looking on my Google Maps right now to see where. There it is. So I'm guessing Traverse Bay is next to Traverse City.
Yeah, it's one of the bays. Yep.
Okay,
you have Grand Traverse Bay.
Yeah, Traverse Bay, right? Let's see what
Correct.
that says. That says, oh, there we go, to Grand Traverse Bay. So the stone structure's in that bay. That's interesting.
Somewhere, they won't say where because they don't want people diving on it.
So that bay looks to me like it could be, water-filled tunnel valleys that would have been carved by glacial meltwater flows. That's very normal to see that kind of, just like look over Green Bay over on the western side.
Yeah.
That was a flow channel. And you can see down there Lake Winnebago.
Yep.
You look on a map, Lake Winnebago is part of the channel that is also formed by Green Bay, but between Appleton and Green Bay is a big dump of sediment. So you don't really see that it's a continuous channel.
Right.
There you go.
Right. There's your Lake Winnebago.
Yep. Yeah, there you go. Put your, put on your, I think, can you switch over to terrain view? Are you in Google Maps?
I think it's Google Maps, but I'm also, here we go. Let me open it in Maps. There we go.
I'm looking for your terrain view usually. Oh, there you go. All the way down to the left. You've got a toolbar. There you go. Now that's, okay. That's cool there. So, yeah, you can see Green Bay. What I want you to do, go down again. You're going to go to all the way over to your map icon on the lower left and go one to the right. Oop, come back right. Let's see. Did you hit the terrain view? Zoom out a little bit on your map. No. I mean,
there we go.
I'm trying to get you onto. I can't tell if you're on terrain. I don't think you're on terrain view. Maybe you are. It's kind of a little bit blurry. But
there we go.
You've got those icons at the bottom.
Yeah.
You've got satellite view all the way to the left, and then immediately to the right of that is terrain view.
Terrain view. Yep.
You can toggle on and off. So if let's see if you can get these to show up on your, So come down to Lake Winnebago. Okay, and now you're going to scroll down to the southwest. Let's say go down to, let me see, let's see, the town of okay, go a little to the south. Go to the south and zoom out. Where's Madison? Trying to get the big picture here. Is that Madison down in the lower
There's
left?
Columbus.
Okay, good. Okay, Columbus. So, okay, go immediately north of Columbus and zoom in and tell me what you see. Keep zooming.
Oh, you mean all the are those not Marines?
No. Those are drumlins.
Drumlins, yeah.
You know what's happening there? That is gigantic sheets of highly pressurized subglacial floods. That's the evidence of massive floods moving under the ice sheets. And they're discharging southwest of there. But yeah, there's hundreds of them, probably a few thousand of them. And they're sort of aerodynamically or fluviodynamically shaped. What it is, picture this, Wayne. The big heavy glaciers come moving across the landscape and they grind and pulverize the substrate, the ground below. They pulverize it all up and turn it into this chaotic mixture of stuff called till, T-I-L-L, glacial till. But it's completely chaotic. It has no structure. It has no fluvial or aerodynamic shape to it. Now you get these tremendous floods of water coming underneath the ice sheets. And because they don't have a free surface, the pressure of that water flowing over the till is extreme. And what they do is they begin to shape the ground mass of till into these elongated forms whose long axis is parallel to the water flow.
Yeah,
and that's what's happening here. This is evidence, one of the many pieces of evidence for gigantic, catastrophic, terminal ice age floods right here.
Yep. Oh, yeah.
And there's a genetic continuation between that sheet.
They're everywhere.
They're everywhere. And notice the angle orientation.
Yep.
There it's almost north-south, right?
Yeah.
Now go back up to the northwest. You see what's happening?
Southwest.
What you got to picture now is a major subglacial stream, like a gigantic river, coming down through what is now Green Bay, carving out a channel, and it gets just beyond Lake Winnebago, and the water spreads out under the glacier, splays out. Does that make sense? That's
yes.
what you're seeing there.
Yep.
That's what you're seeing. And what this is, Wayne, is the evidence that the imprints of the great catastrophes are everywhere about us. And we live amongst the ruins of the former world, and we don't know it, we don't recognize it.
Yeah.
But now we're beginning to recognize it. And archaeologists need to recognize this, because when they're saying, well, where's the evidence? Where's the pottery? Where's this? Where's that? And they're looking for something that looks like our own civilization. Well, here, I got news for them. If an event on the scale, the magnitude, and the intensity of the Younger Dryas were to occur again, 10,000 years from now, archaeologists would be looking for some scant remnant that we were even here with our civilization. Literally, that's true.
And we're not ready for that.
Oh, no, we're not ready for that. And that is going to become a major part of the conversation I'm trying to inaugurate over the next year. I'm hoping that the Trump administration, well, there may be a connection here, because my friend Matt Lohmeyer, Lieutenant Colonel Matt Lohmeyer,
who we've had on the show.
You had him on your show.
Yeah.
Good man, right?
Yep.
Well, he may be appointed to Undersecretary of the Air Force, and he is very keenly interested in planetary defense. And we really need to be looking at that. And I'm a huge advocate of an international cooperative venture of planetary defense, because we need to do it. We need to do it directly. We don't have time to stall because we're living on borrowed time. Literally,
well, we just had a near miss. Didn't we just recently have a near miss?
Oh, we've had a bunch of near misses.
I mean,
bunch.
just within the last couple of weeks, and we didn't know it was coming at us until it went past us.
Every few weeks,
Yeah.
a month or two. Yes. The stuff, the cosmos is giving us lots of heads up. There's been multiple shots across the bow going, all right, you microbes down there on the planetary surface, it's time to expand your thinking and to look up and out and realize you're part of a much bigger cosmic ecosystem, and you're going to have to adapt to that cosmic ecosystem, or you're going to go the way of the dinosaurs and the woolly mammoths.
Yeah.
Yeah, literally.
Well, Randall, this has been awesome. We're at almost 2 hours and 10 minutes, and there's
my God. Yeah, I gotta go, man.
There's a couple of questions.
I got things to do, places to go, people to see, and things to do. I can't be hanging around all night with you guys as much as I'm enjoying it. No, let's have a few questions.
Okay, so Sir Brian Bowden, who is I don't know, he's a Knight Templar. Is he considered one of your brothers?
Ooh, not technically. I mean, if he's a Freemason, he would be.
He's in the Templar order.
Overlapping.
Okay.
Does he know? Yes. Well, let's see. Did I get a recent email from you, Sir Brian?
You may have.
Was once home of the Egyptians. Ooh, what an interesting question. Is New Jerusalem. Hey, listen, Brian, if you can show me even a shred of evidence, I'm open to, would not shock me to find that the Egyptians had been here. Now, in what capacity, whether just as tourists or actually establishing some manifestation of civilization, I don't know. But, we've got to pretty much rethink a whole lot of things about our ancient history. And we can't afford to say, well, this or that isn't possible because I am a free. So we are brothers of the craft. Yes, we are. We are fellow
32nd
men.
degree.
Yep. All right. Well, maybe we'll sit and lodge together one day. Sir
He's
Brian.
A great guy. He's a good friend of the podcast and excellent remote viewer. I mean,
that's something I've just started since I've gotten to know Lynn. Lynn, he was one of the organizers of the remote viewing for the Pentagon. Yeah, he's got a ranch. I've gotten to know him pretty well, and I can't remember.
Is that the Monroe Institute?
No, that's over here in Virginia. Now, Monroe, I know people that have trained through the Monroe Institute, and I don't know what the affiliation. Lynn Buchanan. So Lynn Buchanan, he actually runs training sessions at his ranch out in New Mexico, and I hope to avail myself of that sometime. When I can figure out how to squeeze 48 hours out of one day.
Brian says he would love to sit and lodge with you, brother.
Cool. So,
all right. So I got another question from Rhonda. And she says, I live in the Grand River Valley in Ionia. The banks are steep and a mile or two wide. I wonder if the steep roller coaster hills to the north are current ripples.
Current ripples. The answer to that, Rhonda, is they probably are. Grand Valley was one of the great meltwater conduits. Absolutely. Grand Valley is an analog to the Minnesota River Valley that really sparked my interest way, way back in 1969. Yes. So if you look at a digital elevation map, and do we have time? You still got your map open?
Yeah.
Okay. Go over to Grand Valley, Michigan, and Grand Rapids sits at let's see if we can zoom in here. Okay. Yeah. Here we go. Come to the east. Let's see. You've got Highway 96. Come over.
My map is screwed up. Hold on. Grand Valley.
I can share screen if go over to Grand River Riverfront Park. You can see it quite clearly there. This is what we call in geology an overfit valley or an underfit river.
Okay, I think
I can always share screen here.
Here we go.
Okay, pull it up. Okay, zoom out a little. Let's see, where are you at here? Can you go to Grand River Riverfront Park? There it is. Okay, zoom out a little. Zoom out. Go to the west a little, right there in the bend. Okay, there we go. Now zoom in a little. Zoom in. Okay, there we go. Now what you've got there is the modern river. You've got the Grand River there, right?
Yep.
But look at the channel it's flowing in.
Yeah, it's huge.
Modern river did not create that channel. That channel was created by hugely augmented meltwater flows at the end of the last ice age. And you can actually trace this to the source of where it discharged off of the ice sheet. You can follow that pathway.
Yeah.
There's an interesting, zoom back out again, go up to near, what's that, go up to the northwest, right there at Lowell. Come down, northeast, come down to Lowell, keep coming, right there, go north. Now look at those forms there. What you have there is major turbulence that scoured out these rounded forms, and the modern river is just occupying the ancient channel.
Yeah. Yeah.
And as long as there's no floods on the scale of the terminal ice age floods, these modern rivers are trapped within these big valleys that they're in now. Okay, so now zoom out. Let's see, you're going to zoom out, come all the way across the lake, come across Wisconsin to Minneapolis area. There we go. There we are. Zoom in and come on in. Let's see. Here, I keep wanting to move my cursor over your screen to move things around. I'll zoom out here and let's see. You're going to go immediately to the west, come down to the south. Let's see here. I'm looking for Eden Prairie. Okay, there we go. There it is. Okay, so let's see, come north, come to the north. Let's see, stop right in there and come over to the east. I'm trying to get you to see where, come over a little. You know what? I should probably just share my screen.
Yeah, you can share it.
Okay, let me do that. I'll just do a quick share screen here. Share screen, and see, each time I do this, I am getting really good at this now.
You're going to be a pro.
All right.
There it is.
There it is. Okay, so here, I'm going to zoom out, and here's Minneapolis, St. Paul, and if you zoom in, right about this area, Flying Cloud Airport, right there.
Oh, yeah. Oh, is that your place of awakening?
Right, and it was pretty much, to the best of my recollection, it was right out here along this bluff somewhere, right along here, looking down, and here you can see the modern Minnesota River, and if you go all the way down here, you can see that there's another set of bluffs coming around this way. And in the middle, you can actually see that there are these streamlined forms.
Yep.
Now, what I've learned now in the interim is that if I go down here, you can really begin to see how it's very much like the Grand Valley of Michigan. Look at this here. This is a good reach of it right here. Here you got the bluffs on both sides, and you've got the modern river. And the modern river, see, is trapped in this valley. It won't, you'd have to have a flood. Well, let me put it this way. The flow of, it's now got a name, Glacial River Warren. The peak flow of Glacial River Warren was 4,000 times greater than the flow of the modern Minnesota River. So it's not likely that we're going to get any flood in the Minnesota River Valley that's going to be 4,000 times greater. So this is a fossil feature in the landscape. And guess what? Most of the rivers on North America are underfit, just like you see right here. So this is some interesting stuff.
Yeah.
And again, it's this idea that we're surrounded everywhere by the artifacts of a lost world. And we're just now really beginning to get the eyes and the intelligence and the understanding to perceive that. And that's what's one of the things that's so extraordinary about this time we live in. We didn't even get to talk about the whole UAP phenomena and how that may play in. But I'll tell you what I think the link is right there, and this could be a future conversation.
Yeah. We'll get something set up.
Is plasma physics. Yeah. So, in speaking of sacred geometry, I just want to mention I am doing a sacred geometry retreat at the end of February. Starts Friday night, the 28th of February, and it ends Monday morning. And it's an intensive weekend of immersion into the principles of sacred geometry. And we're going to do a field trip to a nearby, it's going to be held at a place called Beersheba, which is on the Cumberland Plateau of Tennessee, historical resort built on top of a sacred Indian area that was once home to the Beersheba Springs, which was a healing sacred springs that indigenous peoples came from all over. So it has very special, it's an area with very special and unique properties, right?
Yeah.
Because you have to have certain conditions geologically and subterraneously for springs. Our ancient ancestors knew that. So there's a reason why so many of the sacred sites are associated with springs and running water and so on. Brings us back to the whole idea of geomancy and dowsing and all of that. Unfortunately, when they built a road from the valley bottom, this sits on this retreat center sits on the rim of a valley. They built this road up there. Not the people at the retreat, but the road continues on to the east, to the west towards Nashville. But when they built the road, somewhere they severed the spring.
Oh.
So the spring is not functioning now, but it still has a remnant, I'm convinced, of the sacred ancient energy that's there. The resort center was built pre-Civil War, so it has this deep historical roots. It's been kept up. It's a very beautiful location, a great place for a retreat. So it's going to be a retreat. We're going to do a field trip to Sewanee, which is about 25 miles away, and we're going to visit the Sewanee Chapel there, which is a beautiful neo-Gothic chapel. The architect that designed it was inspired by the geometry and symbology of the great Gothic cathedrals of Europe, and he specifically drew from Chartres Cathedral in Amiens.
Yeah.
So we're going to have a field trip to there. We've got a short geological outing because there's an interesting unique geological formation right there adjacent to the site. The cost of tuition is going to include all of the tools and supplies that one needs to effectively participate, and it's going to include all the meals and so on. So I think it's a pretty good deal. But if people want to learn more about that, it's the first sacred geometry workshop retreat I've done in almost going on 3 years now. People want to know more. Awesome. Yeah. Go to howtube.com and put in, or go to Randall Carlson Sacred Geometry Retreat. But I think just howtube.com, because I'm working with my partner, Mike Robertson. He's the founder and CEO of HowTube, and he's handling all of the sales and all of that. And it's going to be fun.
Space is limited, I imagine.
Well, yeah. Space, I think the maximum, we don't want to get it overcrowded. And so I think 54 is the number we've cut it off at.
Okay.
But we're also going to live stream.
Sweet.
I was at the Nashville. Alex Brown. All right, Alex, that's great.
So he's going to definitely be there.
I love to hear that, man. Love to hear it. It's going to be fun. Let's see. It's a Saturday night. I think we're going to, I've studied for years. I've studied Middle Eastern, like Sufi trance rhythms and stuff. So we're going to have some rhythm.
Awesome.
And maybe around we've got a place, that's at our disposal. We'll be able to congregate there after, a long day of learning mystical geometry and all of that.
Yeah.
We'll gather and we'll unleash our pagan side. And
Well, that sounds awesome. And you also have now the Squaring of the Circle podcast. Anything you got coming up for that soon?
No, other than the fact that I'm using that now as a forum to explore a lot of different aspects of here's what we need to know, here's where we need to get to, hopefully. How do we get from here where we're at now? How do we get to there? So that discussion is very wide ranging.
Yeah.
Covering everything from science to politics to spirituality to technology, to the archaic understandings. So all of that, what I'm trying to do is create a synthesis where we can break down some of the artificial barriers between areas of knowledge and try to get a sense of how the interconnectedness of things and the big picture. And Squaring the Circle, of course, is right out of sacred geometry, and it's the look it up, Squaring the Circle. It's like a symbol for the undertaking to solve a problem that's very difficult, if not impossible. However, there are certain workarounds that I think are going to make it feasible, and that's what I'm interested in. And ultimately, out of this would be emerging what I think is in material form. There's so much now in the digital realm that we can now learn, but that's not a substitute for learning in-house, on-site with fellow workers and researchers and students. And that's how you really can ultimately build the community, is by bringing people together. So I'm very much about that. And taking these ancient sacred principles and seeing what we could create in the 21st century by updating those principles. So that's a big part of what I'm going to be diving into over the next year or two.
That's awesome. And just one last thing, Sir Brian says, thank you, Michelle and Wayne, for having Randall on your show. You, sir, are a wealth of knowledge. Blessings to you and yours, brother. Safe travels.
Well, in conclusion, I will say that I am humbled to actually know someone by the name of Sir Brian. My interactions with royalty has been limited in my lifetime, so any chance that I can get now to hang out with royalty, I'm up for it. So, Sir Brian, thanks for checking in, man. Look forward to meeting you in person. I'm sure it's going to happen one of these days.
Yeah. Yeah, he's down in Florida, I believe.
Oh,
yeah.
Well, what town?
Yeah. So he's not far. Brian, what town are you?
Third Eye Live. Ooh, sounds interesting. I'd probably be willing to sit down for a minute or two and talk to you. I never got down to Florida much, a couple of times, but within the last 2 years, I've been to Florida like 6 times now. Particularly Tampa, Clearwater, that area right in there, St. Petersburg, over to Miami, all of that. So I'm kind of thinking like I'm getting this pull from Florida, and I'm not sure how to interpret it yet, but we'll see. I'm probably going to be down there in March to do Matt Bell's podcast, Unlimited, if you know who Matt Bell is. If you don't, check him out.
Okay.
Matt Bell, Unlimited. He's a great guy, and we had a great conversation. Turned out he called me, I guess, last week or sent me an email or something and said that of all the podcasts he's been doing, he's had some big, like he's had Graham Hancock on there and a bunch of others. Let me know that I was number 1.
Wow.
Yeah, I thought,
see, you're important.
Well, don't. I try not. Look. I'm just a regular guy. The only difference is I'm just obsessively curious about everything.
Yes. Yes.
And I've trained my brain.
That's the way you're supposed to be.
I've trained the retention faculties of my brain, is what I've done. I've deliberately set out at a young age to go, okay, I'm going to undergo mental development here. And so I don't think I've done anything that anybody else couldn't do who was sufficiently obsessed.
Well, that's just it, right? It's borderline insanity or being crazy and being obsessed. There's a very thin line you walk between the two. And this could be a whole nother conversation where we look at people today who are obsessed with their phones and entertainment
Right.
versus being obsessed with their world around them.
Exactly. That was exactly the
learn.
words that I had in my mind, the world around us.
Yeah.
And then we conclude this. I'm very much about the big picture. My friend Beckett Fusick and I have done a couple of series we're calling The Big Picture. He's a very, very intelligent, highly intelligent young man, audiovisual whiz. He started his own business at 16. So we've started some interesting conversations, and I'm trying to reach across some of the generational divides, because once upon a time I was the young guy thinking about, old people. And I'll say this too, that I didn't have a lot of elderly friends in my 20s. Almost all of my friends were my peers. Once I went into the Masonic craft, I now had friends of all ages, including elderly gentlemen that were the age of my father and my grandfather and all of that. And that was not even, I wasn't going into it, I wasn't even thinking about that dimension of it. But once I got in there, I thought, wow, I know all of these really cool old guys now. I was 27 when I went. And now, of course, I guess I qualify as one of those old guys. But so I'm trying to dialogue with younger people who know that there's more to life than this. Although this is an important, valuable tool,
yes,
you got to get beyond this, because there's a much bigger universe out there that's calling to us.
Yep.
Let's heed that call. And let's evolve as a species and as a civilization and see what kind of magisterial wonders we can now manifest in our coming future. Yes, indeed.
Yeah, and on that is a great note to end on. And we're going to have to get you back on here so we can talk more about the UAP situation and where you want to go with your thoughts on exactly what you're saying. Maybe we need to teach the teachers, get back to that. We need older, knowledgeable people to be mentors again. And I think that's very huge, especially for the young people of today. So, great points all, Randall. And it's been awesome having you on. So,
well, it's been a lot of fun, and I've enjoyed it. I thought it went great. I did most of the talking. Next time you're going to do most of the talking, Wayne.
Well,
and
you're
Michelle,
the guest.
Oh, and Michelle is going to have to do more talking too. Right?
Yeah, I'm typically like the chat and the producer. It depends on the subject area.
Oh, okay.
Honestly, I've listened to other podcasts that you've done, and you're just a guru of all this knowledge, and it's why I said in my tagline, Randall has the answers. I already knew what Wayne was planning on asking you, and I'm like, I already know that he's going to have input on this.
Yeah. And by the way, I am going to try to get to the Cosmic Summit this year. And if not, I'm going to look at this this retreat down in Tennessee there. So
okay, that'd be great. Oh, man, if you could get down there, that'd be awesome.
Yeah, so I'm going to look at both and see what we can
you will get your own signed by me wooden compass. But we got this grab bag here. A lot of you're going to get like $130 worth of the supplies, so I want everybody to have consistent supplies, because it just makes everything move smoother. And I'm going to have some really cool people there helping me that are going to be going around helping one-on-one people. The way it's going to be set up is I'll be up in front, but I'll have a big screen behind me. We'll have an overhead cam, and that will be, you'll be able to see exactly what I'm doing as I'm showing the techniques. And I will walk people. We'll start very simple, and we'll walk through. And hopefully by the end of the weekend, you're going to have a good foundational base working knowledge. And that will open the door, because I'm really wanting to get into the more advanced material where it just gets mind-blowing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And for me, that's awesome. I love that stuff, but I also want to find a way or do a lesson somehow with you, if you're running it or whoever, where you take that knowledge and you move it outside, and how to set up a floor plan and,
yes,
how to,
yes.
plumb bum, right? And get your alignment.
Plumb Bob.
Bob.
Like Bob, yeah.
Well,
you don't,
plumber. I mean, I know it.
Yeah. Oh,
like
okay. Yeah,
lead,
gotcha.
right? Lead is PB, and
Yeah, when we're on the job, like I'll always say, hey, we go get Bob. They know exactly what I'm talking.
Yeah.
Then they come with, you got Bob? Yeah, got him right here.
Yeah. All right, Randall, this has been awesome. We'll get you back on here, and we're gonna talk more about UAPs, and we'll get into some of that stuff. But this has been fantastic. I've been looking forward to this for a very long time, and I can't thank you enough for joining us tonight.
My pleasure, very much so.
All right, well, have a good night, and we're gonna say goodbye to everybody. So
yes, thank you, and have a wonderful night.
All right, thanks, Randall. All right, hey everybody, we are close to getting out of here, Michelle. Boo.
You're gonna have to take a look and find the link to the trip.
Oh, okay.
So that you can go ahead and add that to the show notes too.
Okay, I will put all that stuff in there. So I'll link the Cosmic Summit 2025 and for the retreat that Randall's putting on here soon. What do you say, toward the end of February, right?
End of February, around the 28th, for the sacred geometry.
Yeah. And just so you guys know, I did remember to stop the poll this time. Were ancient civilizations more advanced than we think? 80% of you said yes. 11% of you said yes, they are, but they're hiding it from us. So in other words, historians and stuff are hiding it from us. And 7% said no. So a total of 51 votes tonight. So there you have it, everybody. And with that being said, Michelle, I think it's time to go. What do you think?
Have a great night, everyone.
Have a great night, everybody. And thank you. Oh, one last thing. Just real quick. One more. And Joanne becoming a new member. Thank you, Joanne. We had Sir Brian, who did a $20 super chat. Thank you, Sir Knight Brian Bowden. We had T-Bone, who gifted out 10 UFO sightings and paranormal encounters membership.
And Jeff from up north gifted one for our friend Brian Bowden.
That's right. Okay, everybody. Now we're going to get out of here. Have a great night. Have a great rest of your week. And remember, keep your eyes to that
sky.